So I'm afraid you're here with a little bit of false advertising. I put in print that the service is going to be on wisdom versus intelligence, but in my brain it was wisdom versus knowledge. So any of you who really aren't interested in wisdom versus knowledge and only wanted to hear about wisdom versus intelligence, now... So this morning we're going to be reflecting together on the similarities and the differences between knowledge on the one hand and wisdom on the other. The dictionary defines knowledge as facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education. Meanwhile, wisdom is the quality of having experience, knowledge, and good judgment. Here's an example. Knowledge is knowing tomatoes are a fruit. Wisdom is knowing better than to put them in a fruit salad. There's absolutely nothing wrong, of course, with the pursuit of knowledge. I'm a huge fan of information, intelligence, perspective, and especially research. But possibility and hope live at the edge of what we can know for sure and certain. The potential for collective evolution resides in the places where we push that boundary. So the pursuit, I believe we all have a responsibility to be informed, even though, as the saying goes, sometimes the desire to be well informed is at odds with the desire to remain sane. By the same token, we have a responsibility to do our best to become wise. In the end, that is exactly what we are doing here in this beloved community. We are becoming wise. We are wisdom seekers, and I'm grateful that we are here doing it together. Of something called the Soul Matters Worship Collaborative, which means we follow certain themes and share resources with other Unitarian Universalist congregations for worship and religious exploration and small group ministry. And on all of these resources, this richness of resources, they point toward that same theme. And when I first saw that the theme for March was wisdom, It made me, to be honest, a little uncomfortable. It seems like the ultimate hubris to preach about wisdom, and not only that, but March has 5 Sundays. One of my ways around that discomfort involves inviting other voices, and in particular, harvesting some of the wisdom in this room. So today, toward the end of the sermon, I'm going to invite you to share your own brief reflections on the differences and similarities between knowledge and wisdom. Now, I do mean brief. I'm not going to let go of the microphone, both so that if you get going, I'm going to take it away. Also, that way it prevents the spread of germs. So, Steve, responses. Responses, yeah. So, also, in 2 weeks, for the introverts among you, we're going to have something called a wisdom communion. And this is a ritual where you're going to be invited to write down wisdom, both wisdom that you've inherited and wisdom that you've learned through your own personal experiences. And then we're going to read those aloud anonymously. So there will be this sort of cloud of wisdom that will manifest in the space. I'm really excited about that. And on March 29th, we're going to hear from our children, including one of my children, some of the wisdom that they have to share. Often we think of wisdom as something that we gain from age, but there's also a wisdom that we forget as we grow up. And so the hope is to connect with some of those earlier and pure insights. Above all, I really hope that this is a subject that you talk about over coffee and in your small group ministries, over breakfast. What does it mean to become wise? And this book that our first reading came from by Krista Tippett is just exquisite. So if you feel like having, she has conversations partners that range from the Dalai Lama to nuclear physicists for this conversation on what it means to become wise. So if you feel like you want to engage the best and the brightest in our world and the wisest in our world, it's a good place to go. So the first difference I see between knowledge and wisdom is that while knowledge builds on the work of teachers and scholars and sometimes collaborators, I feel like ultimately it's an individual pursuit. We accumulate information and expertise on our own, and we do share those things with one another, but the transmission rate tends to be pretty low. Long-term retention rate of a typical lecture is somewhere around 5%, they say. It does go up as the learning process addresses more modalities and becomes, I'm looking at my, did I get that wrong? I'm good, okay. At our professor of education. So, it does go up as the learning process uses other modalities and becomes more interactive, but it's not until we claim our own expertise by teaching the material that we're able to retain about 90% of the information. Meanwhile, wisdom, it seems to me, is more of a communal enterprise. We gather these pearls and we pass them along. When someone says something that we recognize as wise, it sticks with us. Religious traditions at their best are repositories of wisdom. And so wisdom is, at its core, relational. It invites us to care about someone and so remain open to understanding their experience. Krista Tippett writes, I can disagree with your opinion, it turns out, but I can't disagree with your experience. And once I have a sense of your experience, you and I are in relationship, acknowledging the complexity in each other's position, listening less guardedly. The difference in our opinions will probably remain intact, but it no longer defines what is possible between us. So knowledge is individual, while wisdom is inherently relational. Knowledge is acquired through experience, education, investigation, and research. Meanwhile, it seems to me that any wisdom that we don't get in this relational way, receiving or inheriting it from others, whether ancestors, teachers, friends, or spiritual traditions, whatever we don't get, whatever we don't receive, we earn by surviving difficulty. Wisdom school is the school of hard knocks. And if we're honest, we might even admit that often that wisdom that we receive relationally doesn't make sense or sink in until we've learned it the hard way on our own. Ancient playwright Aeschylus put it succinctly, wisdom comes through suffering. I'm going back to the tomatoes and the fruit salad. We don't understand how to become wise or how to survive grief until we've survived it. We don't have the capacity to weather failure until we've moved through it. And each subsequent visit to the realm of sorrow or failure takes us to a deeper level of comprehension. This is how we become wise. It's this spiral version. And you hear people say things like, the universe will give you the lesson that you need to learn over and over and over and over and over again until finally you decide to learn it. And then it'll give it to you again so that you can learn it better. Reinforcement, like with a dog. The Buddha had to leave his place of Brahmin privilege and endure the torments of Mara before he reached enlightenment. Jesus had his 40 days in the desert, and yes, we are in the middle of Lent. People that I see as being particularly wise are those who don't flinch or shy away from difficult challenges, but move through them with an open heart. That quality of open-heartedness is a part of wisdom. Courage comes from the French word cœur, meaning heart. When we live courageously and heartfully, we gradually become wise. I find the fruits of knowledge and wisdom are a little different as well. Knowledge grants us expertise and clarity and insight, but there are hard edges. Knowledge is about measurable data. Meanwhile, wisdom points us toward some more complicated understandings. Wisdom requires that we embrace paradox. Nobel Prize-winning physicist Frank Wilczek speaks about something called deep truth. And the primary characteristic of a deep truth is that its opposite is also a deep truth. Though you can't necessarily hold both of those truths at the same time. Now in physics, the classic example of a deep truth is light, right? Which is both a particle and a wave, but which we can't measure as a particle and a wave at the same time. But wisdom is a realm of deep truths. Just as an example, I find that personal growth happens only when we're able to offer ourselves unconditional acceptance, just as we are. But it also relies on that drive to keep learning and changing. Wisdom takes the knowledge that we are mortal, that one day we will die, and swirls it into a sense of gratitude and wonder, helping us be more present and alive. This week, my colleague Liz James posted the following story on the UU Hysterical Society Facebook page. Some of you may have seen it, and if you're not on the UU Hysterical Society Facebook page, it's a good place for funny UU jokes. But the other day, she posted this story, which I found quite poignant. Pat had been running the church while fighting a battle with cancer for 17 years. One of my treasured memories is Pat in a hospital bed, needles and tubes every which way, going over the minutes of the Care and Connection meeting with me and teaching me how to chair. I had planned to visit her and provide emotional and spiritual support, of course, but she had a different agenda, and you didn't argue with Pat's agenda. Anyway, sometime later, Pat was wheeled into the hospital in Edmonton, a big city about 6 hours from where I live. The doctor told her that her battle with cancer was drawing to a close and that she would not leave the hospital. Pat explained that she would leave the hospital once the doctor gave her the blood transfusion she was there for. The doctor explained that she was not well enough to leave and that her hemoglobin, which carries oxygen in your blood, was in the 20s, and it was shocking that she was conscious. Pat explained that this was why she needed the blood transfusion. She had things to do. The doctor said she needed to be admitted to die peacefully in a hospital room. Pat straightened to her full height in her wheelchair, looked that doctor in the eye, and said, "I am going to IKEA." Pat got her blood transfusion. She went to IKEA. She died 2 weeks later. Liz continues, Pat was the first dying person I knew, well, the one who was more dying than the rest of us. She taught me that dying people are, above all, people who are still alive, and that they should be treated as such. Rest in peace, Pat Adams. Maybe, unless you have some other agenda, in which case I will not interfere. So the nugget of wisdom in this story, of course, is that dying people are, above all, people who are still alive and should be treated as such. And also, and this was buried in there, we are all dying, even as we are all living. Now, we live in a time when we have access to all the information, all the data we might want in our pocket. And this same technology connects us to people across lines of difference in ways we never have been before. If we rely solely on knowledge, all that information mostly leads us, if we're honest, to a place of despair. The challenges we're facing are big and complex, and the odds of our survival don't look so good right now. But wisdom leads us back to hope. Krista Tippett is so lyrical on this subject. I just want to share 3 passages from her book. She writes, "The discourse of our common life inclines toward despair. In my field of journalism, where we presume to write the first draft of history, we summon our deepest critical capacities for investigating what is inadequate, corrupt, catastrophic, and failing. The news is defined as the extraordinary events of the day, but it's most often translated as the extraordinary, terrible events of the day. And in an immersive 24/7 news cycle, we internalize the deluge of bad news as the norm, the real truth of who we are and what we're up against as a species. But our world is abundant with beauty and courage and grace. I'm aware of a growing aspiration to attend with all the tools we have at hand to the human change that makes social change possible. The digital world, though a new Wild West in many ways, is on some basic level simply another screen on which to project the excesses and possibilities of life in flesh and blood. Spiritual life is evolving, and its sources of nourishment are becoming more broadly accessible. Science is yielding knowledge of our bodies and brains that's an everyday form of power for softening the gap between who we are and who we want to be as individuals and as a species. Across social and medical disciplines, we are gathering a radical new understanding of the nature of human vitality and wholeness." Later she writes, "We are so achingly frail and powerful all at once. We are in the adolescence of our species. But I've seen that wisdom emerges precisely through those moments when we have to hold seemingly opposite realities in a creative tension and interplay. Power and frailty, birth and death, pain and hope, beauty and brokenness, mystery and conviction, calm and buoyancy, mine and yours." Last but not least, our world is abundant with quiet, hidden lives of beauty and courage and goodness. There are millions of people at any given moment, young and old, giving themselves over to service, risking hope, and all the while ennobling us all. To take such goodness in and let it matter, to let it define our take on reality as much as headlines of violence, is a choice we can make to live by the light in the darkness, to be brave and free, taking in the good whenever and wherever we find it, gives us new eyes for seeing and living. Knowledge is concerned with finding answers. Wisdom is the practice of living in the questions, and most particularly in the questions that don't have any right answers. Knowledge results in accomplishment. Wisdom helps us develop inner peace, contentment, and a sense of equanimity. Knowledge strives, wisdom blooms. Knowledge is about learning. Wisdom is about growing. Wisdom is about evolving. The choice to pursue wisdom in addition to knowledge requires both courage and humility, and a sense of humor also really helps. But the results of making that choice lead us deeper into compassion and joy. Everyone in this room has made that choice. That's why we're here. This is a community of wisdom seekers, wisdom welcomers, and I am so profoundly grateful to be counted among you. So be it, and so may it be.